Hi, I am Tim, I am the Tinkering Turtle, and today we're going to do a short brake video. The calipers that came on my Magicycle are the Nutt Aries calipers. These are not super strong calipers, but I'm going to show you today how to adjust them and get the most you can out of them. In subsequent videos, I will show you how to convert the Nutt Aries calipers and replace them with Tektro Aries calipers. And I'll also show you how to adjust them, again, in future videos. Today we're just going to focus on the Nutt Aries brakes. Let's get into it. So I'm going to break this down into 3 steps. First, I want to show you how to replace the pads. I'm not going to put new pads in these because I am going to replace the calipers in future videos, but I will show you how to take the pads out and put new ones in. A little quick note about this: when you are playing with pads, use gloves of some sort. I've got some nitrile gloves that you'll see me use that are blue, and that stops the oils from your fingers from getting on the pad itself, and that's a key component. The second step is to adjust the caliper to the rotor, and I'll show you how to do that. And then the third step is to adjust the barrel connectors and the hand levers to get the right distance squeeze on it. So those are going to be the 3 steps. For the most part, you'll only need a 5mm Allen wrench. That will allow you to take the caliper off of the rotor. In addition to that, it'll let you loosen the bolt, the Allen bolt, that will take up the slack in the cable, and that'll be in the 3rd step. You may need, in future videos, I'll show you how to shorten the cable if necessary, and you may need a wire clipper for that, but for the most part, the whole job can be done with just simply a 5mm Allen wrench. So the first thing I'm going to do is take the caliper off the bike so I can show you how to take the brake pads out and put new ones in. So to get the caliper off the bike, there are 2 mounting bolts. This bracket here is loose. The long side goes on top, the short side goes on bottom. This is important because when you put it back together, don't flip that over. It'll adjust where the pad sits on the rotor itself, and that's not a good thing. So we're going to take these 2 bolts out. This top bolt will be longer than the bottom bolt, so make sure you use the top bolt, the longer bolt on top, so that it goes through the longer part of the bracket into the mount. Bracket comes out. Again, you have a long side and a short side. The long side goes on top, the short side on the bottom, but the bottom bolt is shorter than the top bolt. And then you slide the caliper off. Now it looks like I'm going to need a small Allen wrench to remove a bolt to get the pads out. And I'll also get my gloves. Okay, so I'm going to use a 2.5 Allen wrench, 2.5mm Allen wrench to take that bolt out. I want to point out one thing here. As a rule, if you don't have anything between the pads, you should never squeeze the brake handle up above. Mechanical brakes, sometimes you can get away with it, but on hydraulic brakes, the piston will come out to a point where it can't go back in and you can ruin the caliper. So as a rule, even with mechanical ones, I don't ever squeeze the handle unless the rotor is between the pads. Okay, so the bolt goes right through the top of the brake pads here, and you just simply pull it out after you loosen it up. And what it is basically a pin with a threaded area on the one end. And you set that aside. Now this part's fairly simple. Just reach in here and you push on the brake or the pads. They come with a pad, a spring clip, and another pad. Now you'll notice I'm not touching anything so I don't get oil on here. If you do find that you get a little oil on your rotor or on the pads, take a little isopropyl alcohol and just rub the oil off, and that'll help keep your brake pads clean. I mean, most of the problems people have with squeaky brakes, that kind of thing, can be traced back to some sort of contamination either on the rotor or on the pads. I'm not going to do that for this particular video, but if you do have problems, it never hurts to wipe down the rotor with isopropyl alcohol and the pad surface with a little isopropyl alcohol. Okay, so that's how you take the pads out of the caliper. I do want to point out that when I did that, there's a little metal piece here that came out of this side, so you're going to have to kind of shake that back in and get that back in the hole. That little piece fits back in there. Be careful not to lose that as you pull it apart. So now we've taken the old pads off. I'm going to pretend these are new pads. They're not actually new pads. They're the same pads that just came out. All you do is you line up the spring clip. It fits over the pad and the holes line up on the top tab. And you put both of them in there like that. Okay, and just squeeze them together. And then you slide that back up inside until the hole up here lines up with the holes in the pads. Just like that. At this point, you take the pin that you removed and finagle it through, and then use your 2.5 millimeter Allen wrench to snug it back down. Now the bolt's in, the brake pads are back in position, and you're ready to put the caliper back on the bike. Now to put the caliper back on the bike, you'll grab your bracket. Your longer bolt goes through the longer side, which is in the top. You go through the caliper and through the bracket, and then you slide the brake pads around the rotor. And I'm just going to run this bolt in so it's not super snug, but it gets up to where it starts to bind, and then I'll back it off half a turn, and I'll put the bottom bolt in. I'll bring it to snug, and then I'll loose it back up about a half a turn or so. I want the caliper to be loose on there. And then I'm going to take, there is no adjustment on the back side of the Nutt Aries calipers. The adjustment for these is on the front. So what I'm going to do is the backside pad for the rear part of the rotor is stationary. The pad on the front can be adjusted in and out as you tighten the caliper to the mount. So what I'm going to do is tighten this all the way up, pushing that pad in and pinching the rotor. In addition to that, I'm going to go up above and I'm going to squeeze the handle. I'm going to probably use a clamp or something because I'm home alone today. And then once I get both those things done, that should be fairly centered on the rotor. I'm going to tighten the two bolts down. So to do that, I'm going to twist this clockwise. Now that binds the caliper to the rotor, and I'm going to go grab a clamp and clamp the handle. So up here I'm squeezing the handle. I have to use a clamp because I'm here alone today, and that'll allow me to go down below and tighten up those two bolts on the caliper. Once you tighten this up, squeezing the handle is relatively redundant, but it's just a nice safety factor to make sure that the caliper's in the right place. Okay, now that I've tightened up here, I'm going to go up above and I'm going to take the clamp off. And at this point I'm going to loosen this up, because right now as I lift the bike the tire won't move, the wheel won't move, and that's because I've tightened this all the way down. So I'm going to loosen this up a full turn probably. Okay, as you can hear, it's still rubbing, so I'm going to turn it a little bit more. Okay. Now there's just a slight rub on it, so what I'm going to do is just give these a little bit of a loosen. Now one thing, if you sight down the backside here, you can see where the rotor is in relationship to the two brake pads, and you can adjust it so it's slightly off the back pad or the inside pad, and then tighten these bolts back up. What you're trying to do is adjust the gap. That black line is the rotor. Adjust the gap on the back side to the pad, and it's kind of hard to see because the cable's in the way. You want to get that pad close but not touching the rotor. So you pull this pad in, you tighten the caliper down, and then you use this adjustment here to pull the brake pad in to be close to the rotor. Okay, I've got the back side adjusted. Now I want to sight down and tighten up until you hear a squeak, and then back it off. Now you got a perfect fit for the caliper to the rotor. So that finishes the adjustment. I just need to tighten down these two bolts all the way, and that finishes the adjustment for the caliper to the rotor. Okay, now that the caliper is adjusted to the rotor, and I've shown you how to put the new pads in, the last thing I'm going to show you how to do is adjust the cable length to have the most adjustability you can on the road. And to do that, as you look under this barrel adjuster, you'll see this thread here if you pull down the little rubber boot. And you want to turn the barrel adjuster so that's all the way down like that. That gives you the most adjustability on this barrel adjuster as you can get. Now the next thing is to tighten this barrel adjuster all the way in. You'll loosen up the lock nut so that it's all the way out, and then you'll tighten this barrel adjuster so it goes all the way in. So now there's no gap here. You'll note that the brake handle goes all the way back to the handle. You don't want that. You want the brake handle to stop about a thumb's width at full stroke. But what we're trying to do here is change the cable so it gives you the maximum amount of adjustment when you're out on the road. Now to give you that adjustment, you'll see that there's an Allen bolt that pinches the cable down here. You're going to want to loosen that up. Not too much, just so the cable can slide through and you can move the lever. And then what you're going to do is hold the cable with one hand, pull this up with the other, and then tighten this back down. And that crimps the clamp back on the cable. And up above, pull this back, and now you can see I've got a little bit of a gap between the lever and the handle. And I can make micro adjustments on the barrel adjuster to fix that. But now I've basically taken all the slack out of the system. Now the way these barrel adjusters work, you've got two pieces to this cable. You've got the sleeve, which is the black part, and you've got the metal cable. These barrel adjusters basically elongate the sleeve and leave the cable the same length. So when you pull this back, I don't have quite my thumb width here, so I can just pull this out, which makes the sleeve longer and the cable shorter. Keep making adjustments till you get it where you want it. Once you get it where you want it and there's about a thumb width there, then you tighten down the lock nut to lock it in place. Now when you pull, you get a full brake before you hit the handle, and that's what you want to see. So those are the three steps I wanted to show you. Doing the back brake is exactly the same as doing the front brake. The caliper's the same. You just have to repeat the process back there. I showed you how to remove the brake pads, put new ones in if you want. I showed you how to reline it up to the rotor, and I also showed you how to adjust the barrel connectors and take up the slack in the cable so that the barrel connectors had full adjustability. Now I want you to note, I only showed you the minor adjustment on the top barrel connector. You can also screw that bottom connector out, and that'll also make the sleeve longer and take up some of that adjustment as well. So you have more adjustment than just the top barrel connector. You can do it on the bottom as well. That concludes my video on adjusting the Nutt Aries brakes that came with the original Magicycle e-bikes. The new e-bikes, from what I understand, are coming with Nutt Aries brakes, calipers, and I've got a set of those from Magicycle that I'm going to show you in the next video on how to install on the Magicycle e-bike, both front and back. So stay tuned for that. If you have any questions, leave me a comment below. Subscribe if you haven't, and I will catch you next time.